As soon as I saw the description that Dr. Brennan sent to us about his talk, I thought, okay, this is going to be really, really good, because it begins this way. May you sell your vote. May you sell your kidney. And it goes on from there, and of course he is an expert in this area. Dr. Brennan is actually from, or got his PhD from my home state of Arizona, except I'm an ASU grad, you are U of A. He is the Robert J. and Elizabeth Flanagan Family Chair and Associate Professor of Strategy, Economics, Ethics, and Public Policy at the School of Business at Georgetown. Formerly, he was an Assistant Professor of Philosophy and Research at Brown University, and his area of specialty is really political philosophy and applied ethics. He's written a number of books, including the one that he's going to be talking about today, the themes from this book called Markets Without Limits. But he also gets into many, many things about voting, and here are some of his book titles. Compulsory Voting, For and Against. That's interesting in and of itself. Why Not Capitalism? Libertarianism, What Everyone Needs to Know. The Ethics of Voting, and A Brief History of Liberty. He's also working on at least a couple of more books right now. So with that introduction, getting ready for a very, very interesting discussion here, please welcome Dr. Jason Brennan.
All right, well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate you taking the time out to come hear me talk about this stuff today, and especially with the rain and everything, too. So I want to talk to you about the question of what sorts of things should or should not be for sale. And this is an old question that people have been grappling with for a long time. So Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations writes the following passage where he thinks about, did you know that some opera singers aren't doing it for free, but they're selling their singing for money? That's almost a sort of public prostitution. Ooh, can you believe that? Of course, to us that sounds like absurd. Of course opera singers will sell their singing, but at the time it was thought you should do this for free. Suppose you're at a wedding, and let's say you're getting married, and your best man gives a really beautiful speech at the end of the wedding, and then you ask him, you know, how did you come up with that speech? And he says, well, let me tell you, I paid this company the perfect toast, and I filled out some information, I discussed some memories that we had, that funny thing you did in college, and that embarrassing thing you did in high school, and they wrote this really beautiful speech, and I just delivered it for you. How would you feel about that? How many of you would be like, yay, thanks, I really like that? Most of us would be upset. We expect that you should write your own speech. Of course, there's always selling sex. That's always a perennial topic. Like, is it okay to buy and sell sex? And George Carlin, the great comedian, said, it's weird because you can give it away for free, but like you can't sell it. Like, oh. How about, I work in Washington, D.C., and the main thing that we sell is corrupt influence. But the people who want to buy power, they're busy people. They have things to do. They don't want to stand in line and lobby Congress. So, I mean, anyone can lobby Congress. I can lobby Congress. You just have to get in line and go to office hours. But they have better things to do. So what they do is they'll pay a company like this, LineSending.com, who will pay college students or homeless people to stand in line and give them a buzzer or a beeper. And then right when it's about their turn, they'll call and let that person know to take an Uber over and go meet with the congressperson. You can buy and sell organs. You can buy and sell. Should you be able to buy and sell organs, kidneys, eyes, or anything else? Is that okay? Is it permissible to do that? For a while, and they were considering in Congress in the early 2000s, on the basis of some ideas from people at George Mason and elsewhere, allowing people to bet on whether terrorism will occur. So there's this idea, and I'm going to use a swear word. There'll be a little bit of swearing in this, but it's all technical, so it's okay. Economists like to say that a bet is a tax on bullshit, meaning that anyone can just say something like, if Trump wins, the economy is going to go in the toilet. But then you can ask them, you want to bet? Like, how you want to put $5,000 on that? Like, what do you mean by we'll go in the toilet? You mean the Dow Jones will drop in half? How about we bet $5,000 whether that will happen? And most people will be very quiet once you ask them that. But the idea here is that if you actually make people pay for their beliefs, make bets, it will be more predictive of what will happen in the future than just asking people their opinion. In fact, these things work the best. And so a number of economists said, why don't we have an information market in whether terrorist attacks or disasters will take place? It was clear that it works from a theoretical standpoint. In practice, it works. There were information markets in the past, and they're very successful. But both sides of the aisle said, this is disgusting and evil, and they shut it down, even though it might have saved lives. So there's a large number of books on the question of what sorts of things should be for sale. And fortunately, everyone agrees one thing you're allowed to sell is books on the limits of markets. And some of these people, such as Ben Barber and Michael Sandel, interestingly, the most basically commie members of the group here, the most left-wing people here, have made quite a bit of money selling books about the limits of markets. What all these books, though, have in common is that they're incorrect. And what my book has that's different is that it's giving the actual correct view. So at least it has that one thing going for it. So we wrote our book, we called it Markets Without Limits. And here's what we mean by that. That's a provocative title, but we mean something more refined than just no limits at all. What we mean by this is that our thesis that I'm going to try to argue for partially today is that there are limits to markets, but whether you can sell something depends upon whether you can do it in the first place. So if you can do it for free, you can do it for money. If it's okay to give it away, it's okay to sell it. If it's okay to take it for free, it's okay to buy it. Now, there are things you should not buy and sell. You should not buy child pornography. You should not sell slaves. You should not sell assassination services. But it's because you shouldn't have these things in the first place. If a king said to you, I'm going to kill someone for free, well, you shouldn't pay him to do it either. Right? So these things, there are things we shouldn't buy and sell because we shouldn't do in the first place. But otherwise, we're trying to argue that if you can do it for free, you can do it for money. Now, people have a lot of complaints about the way people buy and sell things. And one thing we're trying to argue is that maybe your complaint with that market isn't about the thing being sold, but the way it's being sold. So I like to work guitar references into everything I do. Anyone here actually play guitar? At least one person. For some reason, this metaphor works pretty well and people get it. So guitar amplifiers have a bunch of knobs on the front. Right? They're settings. They're things like how much bass, how much gain does it have, how much volume does it have, how much mid-range does it have, stuff like that. And sub-amplifiers are something called a Marshall super lead. You've never heard of it before, but you've heard it thousands of times on thousands of recordings. That amplifier, you turn it on, you put the knobs any way you want, and it sounds great. Right? So there's other amplifiers, like something called the Mesa Boogie Mark IIc Plus, another very popular amplifier. You've heard it thousands of times on thousands of recordings. You have to get the knobs just right. If you don't have them just right, it sounds awful. But when you get them just right, it sounds glorious. So some markets might be kind of like that too. When you think about who participates in the market, the medium of exchange, how much things are sold for, and so on, maybe we have to get the settings of it just right, and it will be a good market, and otherwise maybe it'll be a bad market. So for example, take kidneys. How many of you have ever donated a kidney to save a life of a stranger? Anyone here? Okay, so one thing I know about you, and by the way, it turns out to be true of everyone else I've ever talked to about this, is that you're not kind and caring and loving enough to save other people's lives for free. Right? Most of you could have at some point in your life given away a kidney to a stranger and saved their lives, but you're just like, I don't care, don't want to. Now, how many of you would have considered at some point in your life selling a kidney for, say, $50,000? Anyone? A few people? No one? At least one person. This is the most negative response I've ever gotten asking that question. Even in Boulder, Colorado, where everyone's basically communist, half the people are like, sure, right? So some people are willing to buy them. Some people are willing to sell. I'd be willing to buy a kidney under certain circumstances. If my kids were sick and the only way I could get them a kidney is to buy one, I would sell my Beamer, I'd sell my guitars, I'd empty out my retirement account to get a kidney for them. So some people are willing to buy them. Some people are willing to sell them. There's a supply curve. As the price gets higher, more and more people are willing to sell. There's a demand curve. As the price gets higher, fewer people are willing to buy. So there's an implicit market price right now for kidneys out there in the world. But what's the legal price for kidneys? How much are you allowed to sell a kidney for in the US? Yeah, $0. You're not allowed to sell them. As a result, we have a shortage. As microeconomics would predict, there's a massive shortage of kidneys. How big of a shortage? It's about 100,000 people. In the US right now, there are 100,000 people on the wait list for a kidney. The overwhelming majority of them will not get a kidney. They'll either die while they're on their wait list, or what's more common is they get too sick to be on the wait list anymore, and then they get off the wait list and they die off of it. Right? There's actually at least one country in the world where you are allowed to sell kidneys, and they actually only allow citizens to sell them, and that's Iran. And there they have a wait list of people who want to sell, not a wait list for people who want to get a kidney. So the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to give you some silly examples, I'm going to give you some tawdry examples, but we are talking about life and death matters because the way that we think about markets is going to determine whether people live or die. All right. Okay, so what kinds of objections do people have to kidney sales? Why are they opposed to them? Well, again, some of them are just contingent objections that you can fix by fiddling the market. So they'll say things like, I'm worried that if people can sell a kidney, that some people will rush in and sell their kidney and not really know about the costs that are associated with their health. Like, okay, well, if that's all you're worried about, we can fiddle with the market a bit. We could have a rule that says you can sell a kidney, but only after you first pass a test showing you understand the health risks. Now, I'm not personally in favor of that regulation, but if you could have that regulation, that would take care of their objection. Or you could say, I'm worried that if we have markets in kidneys, that poor people will be unable to afford them and only rich people will get them. Well, first of all, as it turns out, the lottery in the US doesn't really work. Only rich people get kidneys. Poor people don't get them. So we wouldn't actually change anything. But secondly, in the US, when some people can't afford food, we don't say, oh, some people can't afford food, we should get rid of markets and food and shut down supermarkets. Instead, what we say is, let's have food stamps for the people who can't afford them. So similarly, we could have kidney stamps, kidney vouchers. That would take care of that objection. Now, I might not personally be in favor of that, but that would take care of the person's objection. Or some people say, I'm worried that if we allow kidneys to be bought and sold, poor people will sell their kidneys at a really low price and they'll be taken advantage of. Now, first of all, if that's your worry, by hypothesis, the person who's in poverty, that's their best option, and if you take it away from them, you're hurting them. But if that doesn't convince you, well, you could have a rule that says you're allowed to sell a kidney, but only if you make, say, over $30,000 a year. So again, all of these things, it looks like they're complaining not about the fact that it's being sold, but just the way it's being sold, and we could fix that. So there are a large range of objections that people have to all these different kinds of markets. And I've come up with a categorization on behalf of the other side. So they'll say things like, buying and selling certain things violates people's rights. Why can't you buy and sell a stolen iPad? Because it's not yours. Buying and selling certain things maybe harms other people. So when people advocate gun control, like you're not allowed to buy a gun or a pit bull, or that's because they're worried that it will cause harm to other people. They'll say you shouldn't buy and sell certain things, say jackets made in Indonesia, because you take advantage of desperately poor people. Maybe you shouldn't be able to buy and sell certain things because it will misallocate the resources in question. So Michael Sandel, who's one of the people we'll be arguing with today, he works at Harvard, and Harvard gives preferential admission to legacy students because their parents give more money to the college. Is that fair? So some people think we shouldn't buy and sell certain things because it won't go to the right people. Some people say you shouldn't be able to buy and sell certain things because it will hurt you. So Sarah Conley, who's a philosopher at Bowdoin College, wrote a book called Against Autonomy. Against Autonomy. She's not in favor of it. And she thinks you shouldn't be allowed to buy big gulp sodas or cigarettes or other things because it will harm you. Other people make arguments that buying and selling certain things corrupts our character. It makes us worse people. So they say if we buy and sell this, we'll become bad. That was one of the arguments against the information market and terrorist bets. Like, we'll be betting on death. And think about it. If I place a 50, like right now, I'm happy for the Queen of England to continue living. But suppose you and I placed a bet, and I say, I bet you $50,000 that Queen Elizabeth II will die tomorrow. And then I wake up and I read the news tomorrow and she lives through the whole day. How do I feel? Like, oh, it's a bummer. I really wanted her to die, right? So the worry is that buying and selling certain things might have this pernicious effect in our character. We'll get a stake in bad things happening, or maybe just the fact of buying and selling makes us worse people. But finally, the most common kind of objection, the objection that literally everyone else in the literature makes, and also Congress people make, and newspaper writers make, journalists make, is what I call semiotic or symbolic objections. And these are the objection that buying and selling things expresses bad attitudes. So here's Michael Sandel at Harvard, and he says, markets don't only allocate goods, they also express certain attitudes towards the things being exchanged. And of course, they're bad attitudes. So we shouldn't buy and sell things because of what it says to buy and sell it. If you put a price on a kidney, you're saying the human body is in some way impure and not holy and not sacrosanct. Elizabeth Anderson at the University of Michigan says something like that too. She says, to preserve autonomy, we have to create and maintain separate spheres of valuation which can never interact. And if we fail to do that, what will happen is we'll ruin the meaning of things. So an example she says is, this is her argument, not mine. She says, if we buy and sell sex, then that will ruin the meaning of sex, because then it will no longer be a gift exchange. It'll be just this tawdry, nasty thing. David Archard says, if you buy and sell certain things, the meaning of these non-market exchanges will be contaminated by the presence, the existence of other market exchanges. So I'm going to use a fancy word here, and it's going to be like, at first you're like, what are you talking about? But I'm going to give you a bunch of examples to make it clear. I call these semiotic objections or symbolic objections, because they have to do with the meaning of money. People have this view that the meaning of money is negative. To buy and sell something is to express something negative about the thing you're buying and selling. So semiotic objections are meant to be independent of other objections. So if I were to enslave you and then sell you as a slave, that would express disrespect for you, but it's because I've enslaved you. If I were to sell assassination for you and kill you, that would express disrespect because you're being harmed and killed. But these symbolic objections are meant to be purely independent. It's supposed to be, even if we make the kidney market work so nobody gets hurt and nobody's exploited and nobody's harmed and no one's rights are violated, it would still express disrespect for the human body, and that's why it's wrong. That's what people say about sex or any of these other things that they think shouldn't be sold. So what I want to do is challenge that. I want to say that I think these semiotic objections are not very good. I don't think they work. Another example of a case like this is Elizabeth Anderson says that buying and selling surrogacy, which is a very common thing now, people will pay, they're infertile. I have a colleague who did this. They're infertile and they'll pay to have someone carry their baby for them. She says this is wrong because it expresses the idea that women are just incubation machines. So she thinks it's immoral for that reason. So should we take these arguments seriously? Are they right? All right, so let me go through a number of these objections. I'm going to start with the weakest version of it and then get to the more plausible versions, and then I'm going to try to take them down. So one argument that people will make, this comes from Elizabeth Anderson again, is to say that when you buy and sell something, that shows that you have the wrong attitude towards it. It shows that when you buy and sell something, you regard that thing that you're buying and selling as merely profane, as merely having utilitarian status, as just an instrument for your satisfaction and having no further value. So she claims when you buy and sell something, that's what you express about it, that's what you think about it. But that doesn't seem true. So does anyone here, how many people here have dogs? Anyone here buy your dog? All right, how much did you pay for your dog? $300. $300. What kind of dog is it?
Norwegian Elkhound.
Okay, did you give it a name?
Tyler.
What's that?
Tyler.
Tyler, okay. Okay, is he here now? No. All right. So suppose Tyler got sick. He got a disease that would cost, say, $310 to cure. Here's what I think you would do. You would kill Tyler and just get a new dog, right? But he's only $300. By hypothesis, the dog is only worth $300. He's probably depreciated, right? Because he's old. So, you could get a brand new, sparkling, brand new, shiny dog of the same type for $300, and the dog's $310 to fix. So wouldn't you?
Poor Tyler's had surgery twice that cost more than that.
Okay, interesting. So it shows that you have just refuted Elizabeth Anderson by your existence, right? So it shows that you can buy and sell something and yet still think, do you think Tyler's a member of your family? Is that how you think of it? Yeah. Tyler is a member of your family. You love Tyler even though you bought and sold him. So the mere fact that you buy and sell something doesn't mean that you think that the thing only has instrumental value. You don't regard Tyler as the equivalent of 300 packs of Wrigley Spearmint gum, right? So people love their pets even though they buy and sell them. Empirically, by the way, I was curious about this. There's a different Tyler, not your dog, but Tyler Cowen at George Mason has a thesis that for anything there's a literature. So I actually went and looked up. There are papers on the question of do people who buy their dogs treat their dogs worse than people who get them for free? And the answer is no, they don't. So buying and selling your dog doesn't make you think of it as a mere commodity. Alfred Barnes collected a huge amount of art, and if you were to go up to Alfred Barnes and say, you pay $210 million for all of that art, you must think that it's merely of utilitarian value and has no real inherent value. He'd be like, are you crazy? That's why I spent so much money on it, because I think the exact opposite of it. I love art. So the mere fact that people buy and sell something doesn't mean they have the wrong attitude. So Anderson's wrong, but we can fix up her objection a little bit. She could say the following, okay, when you buy and sell something, it doesn't mean you have the wrong attitude, but nevertheless, you express the wrong attitude even though you don't mean to. And this makes a lot of sense to me because constantly in my marriage, I do this, right? I mean one thing and I say something else and I express the wrong thing and I'm in trouble. And it really is it's not I'm being mean to my wife, really it's just I screwed up. I said the wrong thing and I expressed the wrong thing even though I didn't intend to, and I am actually blameworthy for doing that. That happens, not today because I didn't see her, but it'll happen on Wednesday next time I see her, right? So the idea here is that what this objection gets right is that what you express can be independent of the attitudes that you have. Doing certain things can express disrespect for other people or disrespect for something that deserves respect, even if you don't intend to do that, right? So an example of this might be, suppose you go to Poland and you're sitting next to somebody and you sit like this and your foot's facing them. You'll be expressing contempt for that person even though you don't intend that, and maybe you're blameworthy, right? Okay, so there's some examples like that. Here's another example of a semiotic objection that sounds plausible. So there's Lauren. I was just talking about her a second ago. There's me. As you can see, I've gotten a lot worse. But she still looks like that, so I married well. Suppose I get home tomorrow and I say to her, Lauren, I had a rough day down in North Carolina, and there's rain everywhere and lots of traffic from northeastern drivers and so on and so on. How about I give you $100 and we'll have sex right now? And then I'm like, oh, and by the way, it's kind of dirty. How about I give you another $100 and you can maybe vacuum? And I'm hungry. How about I give you another $100 and you make me a sandwich? Now, you don't know Lauren, but how do you think she'd react? What do you think? Yeah, you're all laughing. Probably not very well, right? Even though she's married to me and I wrote a book on doing this very kind of thing, right? So it probably wouldn't work. So the idea here is, why would that be offensive? So this is what I call the wrong currency objection. The objection is that when you introduce money into certain relationships, you violate the meaning of that relationship, right? So it's okay, we have a house cleaner. We pay, her name's Yanina. We pay her to clean the carpet, and we give her $100 every time she comes and cleans. No one thinks it violates the meaning of that relationship for us to pay her to clean. But if I were to say, pay my wife to clean, they would think, oh, you violated the meaning of that relationship. So people argue that maybe buying and selling certain things is wrong because when you give people money, money means something. And what money expresses is impersonal detachment. It expresses, a kind of hands-off, arm's-length point of view, and it violates the meaning of relationships that are supposed to be intimate. And some people, like Anderson and others, will say this is why you can never buy and sell sex, because it inherently violates the meaning of sex, because it's always supposed to be intimate. Right? So these are two more plausible objections than the original one I gave you, but I still don't think they work, and now I'm going to take them down. All right? So here's the argument I'm going to give. I'm going to say that what we should do is put a price on meaning. We should take the meaning of things and subject that to cost-benefit analysis. That's such an economistic thing to say. When I say that, the people I'm arguing against are like, oh my goodness. They can't believe it. But I'm going to try to convince you I'm right about that. So here's what I mean. Suppose it turns out that a market in certain things, such as kidneys, would be beneficial. Suppose it would save lives. And suppose these markets express disrespect. But suppose there's no other real objection to it. They don't exploit people, they don't harm people, they don't violate anybody's rights, they don't cause a misallocation of resources. Suppose it just expresses disrespect. Then my argument is going to be what we should do is revise our social practices governing what expresses disrespect rather than outlaw the market. Now that's very abstract. You probably don't get it yet, but I'm going to walk you through it and hope you'll see what I mean by this, and hopefully it will sound plausible. So I'll start by telling you a story. Darius, the great King Darius, has conquered the Greeks and the Calations. And he says, I want to learn about the people that I've conquered, the people that I rule, and learn about their ways. And you can be the Greeks and you can be the Calations. And he says, hey, we all agree that when our fathers die, it's incredibly important that we express respect for our fathers, right? That's really, really a big deal. Everyone's like, yes, you're all on board with that. Greeks, let me ask you a question. When your dads die, what do you do at your funeral to express respect for your dad? And the Greeks say, oh, well, King Darius, it's very important to express respect for our fathers, so the thing that we do is we burn our fathers. We burn their bodies in a funeral pyre. Symbolically, it's as if we're releasing their souls into the afterlife, and that's superstitious. We don't literally believe that's what happens, but it's this nice kind of beautiful imagery, and that's what we do. That's how we express respect for our dads. Great. King, would you ever consider eating your dads? No, that would corrupt the very meaning of a funeral. You burn your dad, you don't eat him. To eat your dad would be to treat your dad as if he's a hamburger or whatever the Greek equivalent was in 300 BC. Treat your dad as if he's food. It would corrupt the very meaning of a funeral. It would express disrespect for your dad. Of course you don't eat them. You burn your dad. How could anyone think otherwise? You'd be a barbarian to disagree. Great, got it. Calations, you agree that it's really important to express respect for your fathers when they die, right? Of course it is. We can think of nothing more important than that. Great. Tell me, at the funeral, what do you do to express respect for your father? Well, we eat him, right? We eat the dad. Of course what you do is you eat your father upon his death. That's how you express respect for your dad at a funeral. Well, why do you do that? Well, because in a sense, when you eat your father, part of him lives on through you and through every generation, and then it's as if he's not fully dead, but he lives on forever. Whenever I think about that, I'm like, that's really beautiful. I hope my children eat me upon my death. Right? Okay, well, would you consider burning your fathers on a funeral pyre? We're horrified at that very notion. We can think of nothing more disgusting. Burning is what you do with trash. If you were to burn your dad, that would be like you're saying, my dad's a piece of trash. No, obviously, you eat your dad. You don't burn him. That's the meaning of a funeral. All right? So what's going on here? All right. Now, you might think I'm just saying morality is all relative. I'm not. Right? I'm not saying that. There is a truth of the matter here, morally speaking. And the truth of the matter is you should express respect for your father. And they all agree on that. No one disagrees on that. What's going on here is, in a sense, the Greeks and the Galatians have constructed a different ritualistic language through which to express respect or disrespect. It's as if one's speaking French or one speaking English, and it's like, well, which is the correct language? And the truth of the matter is, there isn't one in the first instance. It's not it's a nonsensical question. So there's an objective morality here. We should express respect for each other, but in a sense, it's just a cultural convention. Which of these things does it? You could do it. You could even imagine a culture in which upon a person's death, what you do is have a party with them weekend at Bernie style. And failing to do that would be disrespectful. So in the first instance, like, well, what's the truth of the matter? And the truth of the matter is there isn't one, right? We should express respect, but how we do it doesn't really matter. All right, so what's arbitrary and what's not? It's arbitrary. It's not arbitrary that we should be respectful of each other. And keep in mind, we're pushing to the side worries about exploitation and violating rights and stuff, because the people I'm arguing against, they want to say that the markets we're talking about would be wrong even if no one's rights are violated, even if no one is exploited, even if no one is harmed, even if there's no misallocation of resources, and even if it saves lives because it expresses respect or disrespect. So it's not arbitrary that we should avoid signaling disrespect for one another. But the way that we do it is kind of arbitrary, as long as we're not violating rights and other stuff. So take this. When I go like this, what does that mean? Yeah, it's good, right? It's a good thing. But there are cultures in the world where doing this is really, really disrespectful, right? Doing this is the equivalent of sticking up a middle finger, right? So it's sort of like depends upon who's hearing it, like the meaning that they attach to it. It's not written into the fabric of the universe that this expresses something good. It could be expressed something bad. It depends on who's listening. And the thing is, we can change these things, and maybe we should, right? So the worry here is that it's just a social construction what this means. Again, I'm not saying morality is a social construct. I'm a moral objectivist. I'm just saying the meaning of this gesture is a social construction. And there might be cases in which we should revise them. So let me give you some examples. If I were to go up to people and say, go to hell, that expresses contempt. But suppose we discovered the following. Suppose it turned out that when you say go to hell, those sounds in the English language, it creates weird vibrations in the air. And those weird vibrations will go through the air molecules and they hit somebody else's body. They'll cause vibrations in their body and kill cancer. So suppose a physicist discovered that. First of all, he'd get a Nobel Prize in physics and medicine. Right? It'd be the biggest discovery ever. What would we do if we learned that saying go to hell cured cancer? How would we change the English language? Yeah, we'd be walking around and be like, go to hell. We'd make it like an informal greeting, right? Right? If I suppose it turns out the following, there's another weird effect like this. And if you say, I respect you as an end in yourself, you are a Kantian bearer of dignity. You have a dignity, not a price. If you quote Kant or something like that. Suppose saying those words in English had the opposite effect. They made weird vibrations go through the air and then would go through the other side of the world and just kill an infant. It turns out sudden infant death syndrome is caused by people quoting Kant. Right? If we learned that that were the case, we would change the language. It would be evil to continue talking that way. So if saying certain things that seems disrespectful saves lives, we would change the meaning of the language. And if it was hurting people, we'd change the meaning of the language. Well, we can go back to thinking about the funeral practices, because it actually turns out there is a reason to prefer the Greek practice to the Galatian practice. Right? So the Foray tribe of Papua New Guinea had the practice of eating the brains of their dead upon their death. However, it turns out that when you do that, it passes along a prion-based disease, which is 100% fatal. When the Foray tribe learned that this was going on, they changed their practice. Right, so before, there was no particular reason to prefer eating the brains of the dead to burning them to burying them. They were all roughly the same. But it turns out that there is a utilitarian reason to change their practice. Eating the brains of the dead kills you, burning them doesn't. So they changed their practice. They didn't say, well, we have to express respect for our dad, so I guess we have to keep eating the brains of the dead, and then we'll be doing that a lot more because we'll all be dying. So what about organ sales? What about the policy analysis market? Could we just say, yeah, well, I guess for Westerners right now, buying and selling organs expresses disrespect, but maybe we should just change the meaning of what counts as respectful. A lot of people think, no, that doesn't follow, you can't do that. But hold on, because it turns out that the way that we think about the meaning of money does appear to be just a contingent fact about the West right now. So the anthropologists Terence Mitchell and Amy Mickle summarize this. They say, in the conventional, by which they mean contemporary Western economic perspective, money comes loaded with meaning. We've attached a certain meaning to money. We view money as a utilitarian commodity that's ordinary, mundane, impersonal, and neutral. It's profane with only quantitative meanings. So if we think of money that way, then to put a price on something is to express disrespect. But we don't have to think of money that way, and it turns out we didn't always, and all throughout the world people have different meanings that they attach to money. So for example, this is the Marina people of Madagascar. The Marina people have a number of interesting practices. One is that when a man has sex with his wife, he is required to give her money afterwards as payment. Failure to do so would be disrespectful. In their culture, if you don't pay your wife for sex, that's like giving her the finger. It's really disrespectful to do that. Now, you might think, this is patriarchy, but I've read a bunch of anthropology on them. Apparently, they have a very non-patriarchal society, and whatever's in there, it resulted from the French occupation. It wasn't originally there. Further, they do distinguish between like regular prostitution and sex within a marriage, and there it has to do not with the exchange of money, but with the degree of intimacy and caring involved. They also, Michael Sandel, who I was talking about at Harvard, he complains that nowadays people are giving cash gifts. He says, that's really wrong. You should give gifts, thoughtful gifts. And a thoughtful gift means, I know what you like and I buy it for you, rather than just giving you $50 and saying, here, go buy something that you like. It turns out for the Marina people, there's no stigma attached to giving cash gifts. And it also turns out that wasn't always the case even among Americans. If you go back to the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, Americans thought at the time that giving cash gifts was especially thoughtful, whereas giving so-called thoughtful gifts wasn't. Let's see, more slides on that. Here, how about this idea? Suppose like it's a funeral, your dad has just died, and lots of people show up, and your mom's like, wow, I didn't know all these people cared about your dad. It's amazing he had this much turnout at his funeral. And you say, no, Mom, I actually paid them to come and mourn. Well, your mom might be horrified if you live in the US right now, but throughout the world, that's actually a very common practice. And it actually was the practice in the West at certain points in history too. Like, this is how you express respect. You would pay people to come and mourn. Right? So it looks like this is yet another contingent thing about how we happen to think of money. Here's a couple that actually pays each other for everything. They're people who really strongly believe in that idea of betting on beliefs. And so what they've done in their marriage is commodified everything in their marriage. They pay each other to do the dishes. They pay each other to watch the kids. And the reason they do that is because they know that by putting a price on things, it forces them to be sincere. Right? It forces them to put their money where their mouth is so they don't just complain randomly. And it also allows them to work out their differences. Now, I'm not saying we all have to run our marriage like that. Like if I were married to someone like me, I probably would. But their marriage works really well. They're a very successful, very happy couple. They're probably in the top 10% of health in terms of American marriages. And it's because they both are using this sort of strategy to make themselves better. So I don't look at them and go, oh, that's inherently evil. I go, that works for them and that's cool. We don't have to do that, but it's fine. A lot of these things appear to just be a social construct. So here in the real Earth, I have the real Earth and twin Earth. Here on the real Earth, you're expected to make your own wedding speech. But it's okay to buy a birthday present rather than make it yourself. It's okay to buy flowers as a gift rather than make them yourselves. And it's okay to buy dinner on Valentine's Day rather than make it for yourself. On Twin Earth, they have the opposite practices. At Twin Earth, when you're at a wedding, you're expected to spend as much money as possible making a really elaborate speech that's paid for by a professional, famous speechwriter, and you deliver that. And to write your own speech would be seen as uncaring and uncouth and cheap and tawdry. You're expected, however, not to buy a birthday present, but to make it yourself. You're expected to grow flowers as gifts and make dinner on Valentine's Day. And the question is, which one of these is the more moral Earth? Which is the right one? And the answer is neither. Like on their face, neither one of them is preferable to the other. So here in the real world, we have real Michael Sandel at real Harvard. He's like, in his recent book, he's like, some people are now paying for wedding speeches. Can you believe that? Don't they see how disrespectful that is? And on Twin Earth, Twin Harvard at Twin Sandel is saying, some people are now writing their own wedding speeches. Can you believe that they write their own speeches? Don't they see how disrespectful that is? And again, on his face, we don't have any reason to prefer one to the other. So it looks like a lot of these things might be social constructs, and we can just change them. However, the other side, what they might try to say is, no, it's written into the fabric of the universe that these things mean that. And the question is, can they come up with a good argument? It doesn't look like they can. So Margaret Jane Radin, who I guess she finished at at Chicago, is that right? She said that, well, prostitution is wrong, and the reason it's inherently wrong is because it detaches intimacy from sex. But the response is as to say, okay, then your complaint isn't actually about the money. Your complaint is that it's an instance of casual sex. So you think all casual sex is wrong, and you think prostitution is wrong because it's a type of casual sex. The money doesn't actually do the trick here. It's not actually the problem. So her argument about why prostitution is wrong is compatible with my thesis, which is if you can do it for money, you can do it for free. And she's like, well, you can't do it for free. I'm sorry, if you can do it for free, you can't do it for money. You can do it for money. And she's like, no, you can't do it for free either. So she's not actually arguing with me despite her intention. Or Anderson says, well, the reason prostitution is wrong is because the man pays for the prostitute's body with cash, and those are not the same kind of good. You're not exchanging the same type of good. And he gets partial control over her body during the exchange. And so one response to that is to say, this is Martha Nussbaum of Chicago, who doesn't find this very plausible. She says, hold on, I work at Chicago, and when I work for my employer, they get partial control over my body too. I have to be at a certain place at a certain time. I have to talk about certain things. When I come into my law class, I can't be like, let's talk about Greek poetry because I find it interesting. I have to wear certain clothes. I can't wear other clothes. Like, I can't wear Slayer t-shirts to work. They get mad at me, even though I want to. So all employment involves some control over people's bodies. It's not clear why that's different. And further, we all the time exchange one kind of good for another. So like Elizabeth Anderson, the person who made this argument, she likes to go around the country giving lectures about ethics, and you know what she gets in exchange? Not money, not more lectures. She's not like, here's my lecture on ethics, you give me one. She's like, no, I want money. So it's not clear why this argument doesn't seem to work. All right? So the bottom line, my view is that the meaning of money is not woven into the fabric of the universe. It's a contingent fact about contemporary Westerners that they regard money as this profane, nasty thing. Because we think of money that way, we outlaw all this stuff and we basically kill people. My view is that money for sex doesn't have to signal distance. Paying mourners at a funeral need not signal distance. Buying a wedding speech need not signal distance. It's at worst bad manners, and we can put a price on manners. If our current code of manners is killing people, we should do the civilized thing, which is change the code of manners, not stick to the manners and say, let's let 100,000 people a year die. So with that, I'll take your comments and objections and so on.
I'm trying to find the right way to phrase this, but you're laying out something markets, and I'm thinking markets free-flowing, but there are certain influences. In other words, we can agree on something, and I'm going to throw up. Well, we just had this thing down here with the NCAA about this bathroom thing. But forgetting about that, let's say the NCAA objects to the CEO of saying, I'm for straight marriage. I don't agree with gay marriage. And the NCAA says every school in the NCAA could not go to Chick-fil-A. That's an influence, and I'm saying is, it sort of takes away the purity of the way markets should work. And I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. And there's this puzzle. Like, people make arguments like this, like you should boycott certain businesses because of what the people who own them stand for. And I'm worried about that for a number of reasons. One is, it's just the case that there's no keeping your hands clean because everything is connected to everything else. So how many of you have read I, Pencil by Leonard Reed? Or about half the people in the room. For the others who haven't, it's really nice. There's actually a movie you can watch about it now, a little documentary made about it. So the idea here is that everything that you interact with is involved with tens of millions of people were involved in making that. So it takes a biography of a pencil. How many people went into making a simple number 2 pencil? And the answer is like 40 million. Right? So the worry here is no matter what you're buying, you're always in some way helping to get money into the pockets of people that express views that you abhor and will also use that money for bad things. Right? So I buy Elizabeth Anderson's book, and then she's going to use that because I want to read it to argue with it, but she's going to use that money to write more books I disagree with. And then maybe she listens to Katy Perry too, and then that's really awful. She's, but we just kind of have to accept that. But the other reason I think we should be really wary of I think there are cases where boycotts and stuff are a good idea, but I think we should be generally kind of wary about this because markets have a tendency to bring us together. Right? So I didn't really deal with it in this talk, but there's this hypothesis that markets make us more corrupt. It's an empirical claim, and empirically it turns out to be wrong. It turns out to be the opposite of the truth. In fact, markets tend to make us nicer to one another. One way of testing that is it turns out that people are like when you play games with them where they have the opportunity to cheat one another or to be generous to one another, be trusting, the thing that best predicts that you will be fair, trustworthy, and so on is the extent to which you come from a market society. And one reason this might be the case, Voltaire, writing in his Letters for England, has this really nice quotation where he says, if you go to the London Stock Exchange, you see Jews and Muslims and Christians coming together and making deals, and they only use the word infidel to describe people who don't pay their debts. And then they go off their separate ways. And the thought here is, well, maybe markets bring us together. It's called the do commerce thesis. The idea might be, I'm Christian, you're Muslim, I think you're an infidel, you think I'm an infidel, but you have something I want, and I have something you want, and we're willing to trade despite our mutual revulsion to get it. But then once we start trading, we interact and we recognize, you're not that different, I'm not that different, maybe you're okay. So for that reason, I'm really worried about this kind of new trend of like, let's just boycott everybody we disagree with, because I think that's going to make more problems rather than solve problems. Yeah?
I just want to have a little fun with the dog example. From an economist standpoint, what if the $300 wasn't his reservation price? So if he had consumer surplus in buying his dog at $300, how would that affect your thesis?
Yeah, so do you have an economics background by any chance? All right, so you'll get this. Some people, it'll go over your head a little bit, but it's true that you get a surplus for the dog, and for almost anything, there's going to be a price at which you're not willing to pay it, in part because you might not have the money. Or so would you pay $50,000 to save Tyler?
How much?
$50,000.
I don't think I can afford to pay $10,000.
Okay, yeah. How about could you afford to pay $10,000 but then choose not to? Like, what would be an amount that you could afford to pay that you wouldn't be willing to pay?
Oh, you're putting me in a tough situation here. I'm going to have to go home and talk to him.
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah.
I can't answer that question.
Okay, maybe for you, you'd be willing to spend every last cent that you have and you just run out. But there might be other things like, I value my relationship with my brother intrinsically, but if a genie came to me and said, here's the choice, I'm going to take $100,000 out of your bank account, or you can keep that money, but you never get to see your brother again, I might be like, all right, well, we don't hang out that much. Right? So it seems like I'm putting a price on things, and so a lot of the people I've been arguing against, they say, aha, this is the problem. When you put a price on something, you're saying it's fungible with everything else. So you really are saying your brother's worth 50,000 packs of spearmint gum. Right? So it turns out that they have utility theory wrong. So you know Morgenstern and von Neumann, right? You've probably read about them, and that they don't know about this. So I won't go through the proof, but it works something like this. If you were perfectly rational, which you probably aren't, I'm not either, but if you're perfectly rational, you would have this thing called a utility function. It would be a ranking of all states of affairs from better and worse. This is just how things ought to be. That means you might value some things intrinsically. It's just a ranking of all things. And the people I'm arguing against, they're totally cool with that. They're like, yeah, even on a Kantian point of view, that's possible. And their worry is what's going from an ordinally ranking to what's called a cardinal ranking, where everything gets a price attached to it. There, it makes it sound like everything is merely instrumental value. But these two economists in the late 40s, von Neumann and Morgenstern, showed that if you have an ordinal utility function and you add in a couple little axioms about how people respond to lotteries, and you just suppose you value money at all, it turns out an ordinal utility function can always be turned into a cardinal utility function without violating the hypothesis that some things have intrinsic value. So that's kind of technical, but if you read the book, I have a little summary of that tries to make sense of it, but it will take more time than I want to spend right now. But that said, I think the people who are worried about putting a price on things for these reasons, they just don't understand utility theory. My colleagues here, they're all arguing against what economists thought 150 years ago, not what economists have thought for the past 60 years. Yes?
On that point, I think lots of people don't see what utility theory is, or even translated amount of economics into English, that they don't see it. In my experience, a lot of people take this and just remind me. I've often used the little finger example, which lots of people use. If your little finger was cut off today, unfortunately, it would be very traumatic. If you heard that $5,000
can't accept them, so they end up coming up with all sorts of rationalizations. Or I think I think it's hard to have an honest debate or argument about some of these matters, not because they don't see, not because they can't see, but because the implications are something they don't do.
Yeah, that's a really great example. I mean, that came from Wealth of Nations, right? That's where maybe it was actually the other one, the moral sentiments, but that's an Adam Smith example, right? I have a worry about this debate. So in the structure of the book, we pretty much are like, on behalf of you, the other side, here's a categorization of all of your objections, and we're going to go through them one by one and try to convince you on the basis of shared moral premises that we're right, not you. But at the end of the book, we're like, we suspect a lot of people are just like, you took down all my arguments, but I just think there's something wrong. And when you look at the language that people use for these markets, it has a very visceral tone. They'll say the markets are ugly, tawdry, nasty, disgusting, vile, repulsive, repugnant, profane. So they use this language of sanctity for some things and language that signals nastiness and disease and so on, which suggests that they're having a kind of visceral, gut-level reaction to it. And so it turns out empirically that like some people just have very strong disgust reactions to lots and lots of things, and other people don't. I mean, there's actually a way of testing this. Like this is an experiment they'll do. You take like a cup like that, and you take a clean rope and you attach the rope to a cockroach, and then you see like, if I have the cockroach over here in a 10-foot rope and put it on the other side of your drink, will you drink the drink? And you would have done it with a rope, say, but no cockroach. And some people won't, and others will. And then how close can the cockroach get before you're like, oh no, it's contaminated. So it turns out like the people that have very strong disgust reactions are also the people that find these markets evil, and the people that have weak disgust reactions tend to be the people that think they're okay. Which makes you start to wonder how much of this is just rationalizing disgust versus like a genuine moral objection. But to be kind of respectful to the other side, we're going to go through your explicit objections before you even discuss the psychology of this.
So what's the reaction when you present your theory and your views to non-economists and non-academics?
Yeah, good question. So to my surprise, economists tend to be like, obviously we should buy and sell this stuff. What's wrong with everybody else? And we kind of expect that. When I present this to like philosophical colleagues who tend to be pretty, I wouldn't say anti-market, but they're not really pro-market, and they tend to like find these objections plausible, my surprise has been most of them have the following reaction, like, oh, I guess you're right. I didn't expect that. Like, I wasn't inclined to agree with you, but I guess when I read it carefully, I think maybe you're right. So I've actually had a pretty positive reaction. From lay people, it's mostly been positive too. That doesn't mean, maybe everyone in the room disagrees with me, but to my surprise, I expected most people to be like, well, that was a good challenge, but I don't buy it. But actually, it seems like the majority of people end up accepting it when they read it carefully.
I think that's interesting because we live our lives and make decisions not just based on what we know or what we think. We do it based on what's in our heart and how we view other people. So I'm surprised that a lot of people would look at that and say, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, well, in a sense, I'm trying to appeal to people's heart. Like there's one way of doing philosophy, which is like, let me first try to convince you of some highfalutin, implausible moral theory, and then deductively show that implies a bunch of things. And it's not very plausible because no one ever thinks this theory is any good. What I'm trying to do is take shared moral premises, like we agree saving lives is important, we agree on this other stuff, and you have this aversion, maybe I can explain that away. So I think I'm appealing to their hearts at the same time I'm arguing against their heart. I'm like, let's use the good part of your heart against the bad part of your heart. That's what I'm trying to do.
Any other comments, questions?
Yes, one more. With most markets, like buying shirts, we sort of self-manage, but you have the professionals have viewpoints that are sort of locked into their analysis. But the one word you never mentioned is government. For example, there are certain markets where you give pause, a kid in this and that, but then you have a governing influence, which not distorts the market, but sort of manages the market where you and I don't.
Yeah.
Is your book reference that as well?
Yeah, actually, so early on in the book we say, look, we happen to know just based on how people react to things, if you're like really libertarian leaning, we can predict you're inclined to accept our thesis, and if you're like a Marxist, you're inclined not to. It turns out empirically Marxists find literally the idea of selling a toothbrush causes revulsion. Like they get a reaction from that. So we expect that like people's ideology to play into this. But that said, this isn't really a libertarian. It's not either a libertarian or pro-libertarian or anti-libertarian book. You could be a libertarian who thinks there should be no government at all and disagree with everything I say. So imagine the Marxist philosopher Jerry Cowen and the libertarian anarchist Murray Rothbard had kids somehow. And one of them is, let's call him G.A. Rothbard. G.A. Rothbard believes there should be no government involved in anything. Everything should be legal to sell, but nevertheless, buying and selling anything is immoral. That's a coherent view. It's a weird view, but it's coherent. You could think no one should buy and sell anything, but the government shouldn't stop them from doing it, right? And you can also have the view that all these things can be bought and sold, but only under a very highly regulated market. So I've sometimes, like, people on the left are like, look, I want heavy government regulation of every single market, including all of these markets, but I'm okay with buying and selling provided it's regulated. So I really think the question of how, in a sense, what we're trying to do with this book is deflate the question. We're like, the question of whether it should be allowed isn't actually the interesting question. The question is instead, which regulations, if any, should be placed on these markets? Given my ideological background, my view of government versus market failure, I tend to favor very few regulations, but you could accept the moral claims but have the opposite view and say we should heavily regulate everything. And then we're just disputing regulation. We're not disputing the morality.
Last question.
Yeah, to build off that, strikes me that that's sort of the argument for a state-run lottery for higher education. Something that people tend to find, in and of itself, gambling is wrong, but they're willing to make a moral compromise if it's done for something they think is good, funding schools.
Yeah.
It's more of a comment than a question, as it turns out.
Yeah, interesting point.
Jason Brennan from Georgetown.
Thank you.